Welcome. In this video, I will overview eggs from Chapter 21 in your On Cooking textbook. The composition of eggs. On the outside, you will find the shell. The shell really protects the egg from breakage and protects any additional bacteria from entering in. It is porous though, so strong odors do find a way of penetrating. And as far as the different color of eggs, really it comes from the different breed of hen. So you'll notice the outside shell here, and at the top there is this air cell. The older the egg, the larger this air cell will become. Right underneath the shell is a very thin shell membrane. If you're ever peeling a hard-boiled egg, that is that thin film that you'll find in between the shell and the egg. You also have the yolk in the center, the big yellow part, that has 3/4 of the calories of the entire egg. There is some protein in it and some vitamins and minerals, but all of the fat is found in there, as well as lecithin. This is what's responsible for the emulsification in certain sauces like your hollandaise sauce and in certain emulsification products like your mayonnaise. Then you have the egg white, which is also called the albumin. This is where all the protein and riboflavin is going to be found. The egg white contains the Chalez cords here. The more predominant, the more they show up, the fresher the egg is. It really is holding that yolk in place. As far as the different sizes go for eggs, most recipes will call for a large egg, which is 2 ounces. Now that does include the shell. So these are estimates here. Technically 2/3 of the white, 2/3 of the egg is white, and 1/3 of the egg then is the yolk. For calculation's sake, I use 1.25 ounces for the white and 0.75 ounces for the yolk. There are different sizes available: jumbo, extra large, large, medium, small, and even peewee. Large then would be 24 ounces per dozen, again 2 ounces per egg. The way the sizes increase or decrease for every dozen, then looking at getting a dozen eggs in a carton. If you went from large to extra large, the extra large then would weigh 27 ounces per dozen. And then the extra large would weigh 30 ounces per dozen. So that's how the eggs increase in size by the names. In regards to the grading and quality of eggs, as eggs age, they definitely lessen in their quality. So a AA egg then is referring to the freshest egg possible. When you crack that egg open onto a plate, it would stay nice and compact. It would not spread out throughout the plate. The white would be very thick. Sometimes it is referred to as the thick part of the white, and then the runny or broken down part of that albumin or that white. It has a very predominant Chalez cord. The yolk stands very nice, round and high, firm in the center. And the shell is nice and clean, has a normal shape, isn't unbroken or isn't broken in any way. You really could use it for anything, but being that it's a fresh egg, it's really good for some cooking methods like poaching and some, fried eggs. That way you're keeping the form and the shape of it there. Looking into grade A then, so as the eggs would age, so leaving them out at room temperature for 24 hours, say, would age them into that grade A. In your refrigerator for about a week would then lessen them to that grade A. And what happens there is that white starts to spread out a little bit more. You'll notice then with grade B, you'll crack that egg into a pan and your yolk's on one side and the white's way on the other side. There's really no Chalez cords at that point. It definitely gets very clear and watery, again, the more it ages. So the yolk, while standing firm and high in the beginning, as it ages then, it still will stand firm, but then as it gets extremely old, it will be enlarged and really flattened. Older eggs are good for hard-boiling eggs. Really having an older egg seems to work a lot easier in the peeling method, although you definitely could use fresh eggs as well. Also for, incorporating, whipping eggs or for making omelets, scrambled eggs, all of those are fine to use your older eggs if you're using them in baking. Again, those would all be appropriate uses for them. With the grade B eggs, it could just be in a normal shape, or it's slightly discolored, or there's, stains on it. Again, there's other things that you could do with them, definitely. They wouldn't be discarded. In regards to storing and sanitation, again, as eggs age, they start to lose their density. So they're definitely one less grade again over a period of time. So I mentioned before 1 day at room temperature, or again a week in refrigeration. They can be delivered at about 45 degrees, and then they need to be stored generally in your cooler, which is under 40 degrees, even though noted 45. Pasteurized eggs. There is a natural risk for salmonella associated with chickens, actually associated in the fact that it is part of their intestinal tracts. It's naturally found in their intestinal tracts. So as the hens are laying these eggs, there's always the risk that it could be on there, that it could be cross-contaminating onto these eggs. So they do go through a washing process, and you've seen that in the processing video. But for high-risk markets, so those that have, immune deficient systems, so we're talking the elderly or in nursing homes and hospitals, younger children, again, women that are pregnant, we're going to make sure that we are serving eggs that have had some extra attention paid to it to ensure that there's no salmonella risk. And how they do that is by heating up that egg to a temperature of 140 degrees for 3.5 minutes. And you saw that as part of that processing video as well. There's many different forms of eggs. You could definitely get them fresh in their shells, but you could also get them fresh in a liquid form. But if they are liquid, then they need to be pasteurized. You could get them in the whole form, although most times you're going to have to get those from a purveyor. Ones that you'll get at the grocery store are those egg substitutes that we'll talk about down below. You could get just your egg whites, and those are readily available, but egg yolks on their own are typically only found through your food purveyors. It is important to realize that they are not sugared, which means that they cannot be frozen. There are frozen egg whites. Well, again, egg whites are usually the frozen egg products that we'll find, and then yolks, again, will need that sugar there. There are dried egg whites that it's a form of meringue powder used to stabilize icings. There's also just dried eggs to be added to products where we're not adding a liquid to it. And then there's definitely egg substitutes. Nowadays, there's a lot of soy and milk protein. It's I think meat egg is the label, and they're selling, it's in a carton, but it's actually a dry powdered form. But then when you go into the liquid products, it's not actually it's not actually eggs in there. It has the egg white, but then it has some soy and milk proteins, different products that are substituted in there for the yolk. So it's making it less fattening and still acting in a form like eggs do. So when we're talking about cooking eggs, and there are many different ways, I'm sure you've heard, and if not, let me introduce you to the fact that the toque, again, has 100 pleats on it. And those 100 pleats of the toque, the chef hat, the tall chef hat, is to represent the 100 different ways of cooking an egg. But before we talk about that, it's important to talk about coagulation, how those eggs cook, and the idea that the whites are going to cook before the yolks cook. You can see here the whites cook at 144 to 149 degrees. And then the yolks start cooking from 149 to 158 degrees. There's a very small window to where those whites are cooked and those yolks are not. So, and that's kind of that money spot what we're looking for. You'll notice a whole egg, because of being in the shell, will need a little longer to completely coagulate, to completely cook, and the idea that the yolk's in the center there, which takes the longest to cook. And then the custards are where now we're adding in some cream, some milk, some other products, so that temperature is higher because those eggs are distributed amongst other products as well. I do want to note the sulfur and iron reaction. This is that green coloring around the yolk. If you've ever hard-boiled an egg and you're like, oh, something wrong with my eggs, the yolks are all green on the outside. That's because you overcooked them. You cooked them too long. So the sulfur and the iron in both the white and the yolk reacted with each other, causing that green. If you've ever seen on a buffet line some scrambled eggs that are starting to look green, you know they're real eggs then, because they're starting to get overcooked. If they're there and they're looking great, but yet it's kind of sizzling and boiling, then you know you might have a liquid egg product that has kind of some imitation products in there to make it look like the yolk. For different foams, I had mentioned before, as far as whipping up your eggs, using old eggs would be great for this, but it is important when you're whipping your egg whites, they're completely fat-free, meaning there is absolutely no yolk in it, or else you can whip all day and will never incorporate air into that. And by adding a little bit of cream of tartar, that seems to make it a little stronger sugar. Once it's incorporated some air, that really works with it. And we'll talk about that more in the baking methods as far as whipping and to create foam products. But your egg whites work better at room temperature, as well as your egg yolks when you're trying to whip those. And again, we'll talk about that more with our pastry section. There are several ways to cook eggs, and I'm going to briefly talk about each of these, but then I do have some videos following to introduce you to them even more. So simmering in the shell is really that hard-boiled method, but again, you don't really want to boil them. You'll notice down here in the picture, the one on the right has that green sulfur that I talked about versus the one on the left is a nice, perfect yellow. Trust me, it's a proud moment when you open your egg and you're like, yes, I got that perfect yellow there. I do have a couple methods down here for you, as you will see with the video as well. I personally prefer to start my eggs in the water, and then I'll bring it up to a boil, and then I will start the clock and 12 minutes later take it off. That's how I prefer to do it, but there are several different methods again for whatever works best for you. Poaching, again, you want to make sure you're using the freshest eggs. Basically, you're cracking these eggs into a small bowl or ramekin, and then you're plunging them into water that is at the poaching stage. So no real bubbles coming up. You don't want any disruption going in that water, but it's really great to add a little vinegar in there, not too much to distaste it, but a little white vinegar is great just to help that kind of cling and bond together a little better as soon as you add that to the water. As far as pan frying goes, there's so many varieties here, but these are by far the most common. Sunny side up is where you're going to have an egg that has never been flipped, such as on the right hand top right here. Basting then is where you're adding a little bit of moisture in there, putting a lid on, and then basically steaming it, which you'll see on the bottom right. So it's not flipped, but it's cooked a lot more on the top. And then on the top left here you have what looks like an over easy or an over medium. Over easy, completely runny yolks. Over medium, still a little runny, but a little bit on the cooked side. And over hard, definitely fully cooked yolks there. And then they're scrambled, which of course is some of the most popular eggs out there. Shirred eggs, I'm not sure if you've heard of these before, but shirred eggs just refers to eggs that are baked in individual ramekins here, but typically have some sort of protein and a cheese sauce mixed throughout, as well as some extra cheese on it as well also. I do have a video to include it to introduce it to you a little bit more. It's a little hard to picture, but looking at that picture below in the video, it'll give you a better example. And as far as omelets, I have Jacques Pepin explaining the French classical omelet to you as far as shaking the pan and stirring with a fork and making sure there's no browning, not flipping it but folding it. You'll see that video. An American omelet, how we expect it here to be flipped in a pan with ingredients tossed throughout, and then the cheese in the center and extra ingredients on top. And then there's the frittata, which are these open-faced omelets that never get flipped but get finished in the oven to make sure they're fully cooked and usually topped with cheese. I worked at a great restaurant when I was a kid, and they had these nice roasted potatoes underneath these awesome frittatas smothered with melted cheese on top. And then custards. And custards we'll get into with the baked goods, but custards still are involved with egg cookery, so it's important to mention. And by definition, custards are a liquid that is thickened by the coagulation of eggs. So a liquid that is thickened by eggs cooking, that's what that medium of thickness is. So there's baked custards and then there's stirred custards. Baked custards such as your creme brulees, your quiches or custard pies. You also have your stirred custards such as your pastry creams. And we'll talk a lot more of those in our baking and pastry chapters. For now, this concludes the egg overview. Thank you.